Hello, we're back. We keep coming back. I'm Jen Briselli.
And I'm Kyle Godby. And these are our field notes from the swamp. So we're going through our notes, and there was a prompt that we had stashed for me to tell a story relating to burnout. And this is and it's kind of it's a fun story for me. I was there. It was fun. So I'm gonna kick us off with this. We'll see where we spin to. So we've talked about being in the deep in music scenes, and it started when I was from an early age of being a hardcore record collector, but then it just accelerated from there. Me making music, trying to record music into high school, and then just being in the local music scene and being working on a zine in the music scene locally and being at concerts nonstop, and then ultimately going to school for sound engineering and ending up in the music industry, and all of that just it ballooned constantly. But that was my orbit, was always just other music nerds and other people in the scene and other engineers and all we did was talk music all the time. Every once in a while there was some, we'd stray a little bit, but for the most part, we were anchored in talking about music. And I don't remember how I ran into this other circle, but I bumped into a group of people, made some friends with folks that really just didn't care about music, and we were met at a pool hall or something like that, and we started playing pool and playing chess and stuff like that. And
Wait, can I interrupt you really fast? Didn't like music at all, or just were the kind of people who were like, I'll listen to whatever's on?
Yeah, exactly. I'd be like, we're not listening to music right now, and they're like, I didn't even notice. I was like,
okay.
No. This has got to be top priority. We can't move until we have some music on. Or I'd start hey, did you hear this thing? And they'd be like, what? No, never. I don't. Radio who? Come on. So yeah, somebody finally in my life used this phrasing properly. They said that they were musically anhedonic. And that's what this group is. If you don't know anhedonia, for listeners out there, it's the inability to feel pleasure from something. And so this was that group. They were unfazed by music, from what I had. Not that they couldn't be, but it was not a thing that ever came up. Anyway, so this is a group of theater nerds. And they go camping with regularity. And so we go camping in the Berkshires for a long weekend, and I'm with this group for the first time for 3 days straight, long drive where I'm playing music and they're just trying to talk over it, and I'm not even trying really, because I know I'll just put on something kind of safe and in the back I'll put on Tool and leave it alone and just not address it, kind of thing. We've got a 5-hour drive or whatever it is, and we're up there, and now we've got no power, and so we're not listening to music, we're not talking music. And as this time's going on, I'm getting comfortable. And it wasn't that I found it out on that trip, but it was, now there's hours and now there's days where I'm not talking music or listening to music with people. And it's probably the first time that had happened since middle school. And I'm in my early 20s at this point. And not that that was the one and only thing I had any interest in, but it was always a central gathering point for all of my other interests and my other people. And as I'm driving back from the Berkshires, I'm getting pissed off about my job in the music industry. I'm getting resentful of all of the music conversations. I'm realizing I've been embedded in this for so long that I've just forgotten to have silence or talk about other things, get into other stuff. And I realized at that point that I was developing a resentment towards music and enjoying music because now my livelihood depended on it. And this is early 2000s when the music industry as we knew it then, was crashing, and we talked about that a few episodes ago. And so it was becoming more stressful to just is there going to be a job anytime soon? Like, the work's not necessarily there. All my friends are being laid off all over the place. All of my favorite record stores are closing down, that kind of stuff. I was learning pretty quickly that I had developed a resentment for music. I didn't even know it. And I needed that space away to kind of, to first identify that. But then when I came back, I probably got laid off. Dutch East India went under maybe 2-3 months later. I got laid off within the weeks of it going under. And I was kind of at peace with that. And I was ready to not pursue, let's go back into music necessarily. So I spent my time in production after that, and that was fine. But like, it was a profound moment where I realized music has got to be my thing, that other things I do in my life are going to afford me the time and space and energy for music, but I'm not going to conflate the two ever again. That was it. That was the whole.
Do you ever
I
feel
needed
that
the
way
breather.
about complexity?
Yes. God, yes. We were just talking about this recently. Yes, it was every January where I was taking the breather. No thanks. These last few weeks, I've wanted, not that I don't want to conflate the two. Not that I don't want this to also be the work that I do, because I don't know that I'd be able to like segregate them. Just like I can't really segregate music from my work. It's still where so many of my metaphors are embedded, my experiences are associated. Like, all of it kind of trues back to that. But I'm not actively selling music or recording music or anything along those lines. Not as part of my day job. Could I throw in and say, I don't want complexity to be a part of my day job anymore? I don't think that even applies. I imagine there could be a time where I don't want to have that as my tagline, and it might go somewhere else. But I think that it will be more of a natural progression of, I have a better way to articulate this, and less of a, I resent this now. It's been detrimental for me to engage in it. It's my guess anyway.
Yeah, it's interesting that like the resentment part is like the difference. I mean, because I thought your story was going to go any number of ways too. I'll have to talk about some of the things I was thinking about that, but yeah. I mean, I worry I might be repeating myself. Sorry, guys, but the notion that having something that is really core to your being or to what is meaningful to you, like when people talk about, even at a high level, purpose-driven work, your values, being values aligned in the work you do and all that. And we've talked in little bits about, my own recognition at various points over the course of my life where, in a similar fashion, not wanting certain aspects of either my personality or my preferences to be completely overlapping with my work, because then it just creates the circumstances like you're describing, or any number of others, for something to either have your life. If you do what you love, you will potentially have the passion for it sucked out of you by being required to literally transact and perform labor around it for money. Like, that is the nature of how it works. That's not a given. But I do think there's something in that is obviously on display here. But there's also the part where you came away resenting the thing. Whereas I think sometimes about, for everybody who's super passionate in the last several years, like, I don't just mean interested, I mean passionate about systems and connecting and complexity and, being boundary spanners and all of these types of things. There's a difference between being interested in something such that you gain knowledge and experience with it and want to put it to work in the world and share it with others, but then being just like passionate about it on like this intensely like deep level, which I think we all can't help but do. You have to be careful. You have to tread lightly where you let that become like literally who you are, or your maybe not your identity, because I'm not arguing that point. But anyway, this is really interesting that you say you resented it.
Yeah, and maybe it coincided also, oddly, with a terrible era in music from like 2002 to about like 2008. There was just
Wait,
garbage coming out nonstop.
I
It was
mean, I
just
guess
weak.
it depends on what kind of music you're talking about and like where. That was a great era.
Probably. Well, it could have been. Yeah, I suppose. I didn't. That was an era where I was pretty regularly disappointed with music as a whole.
There was a lot of
That
really good
might have been
hardcore. A lot of really good punk and hardcore happening that era.
really. I think I was done with hardcore by then.
I'm not convinced your hardcore is the same hardcore as my hardcore anyway, so there's like 18
It,
hardcores out there.
right? Yeah. Yes.
Doesn't matter. We're not here to argue about that.
No. But as a whole, like there was I stopped buying albums around 2003, 2004, or something like that. As a whole, I don't think you could buy downloads quite the same way, but I was downloading music, but I don't know, I wasn't buying it until later again. But I didn't feel like I was missing out on much. There just wasn't. I spent that time going back to like the 70s and digging up a lot of proto-punk and early just avant-garde stuff for the most part, or going back and getting into 80s hip-hop, golden era hip-hop. But
Yeah. Well, that was
my
kind of
time
having
to
its moment
turn
then
back.
too. Anyway, I think in that same time frame, or at least I knew some other people who were digging back through. So there must have been something in the water for that. But it's so the one thing when you mentioned in your story that also struck me, didn't it's not really as core to the point as it as other things, but this notion that you literally couldn't you like always had music on at all times. And this idea that you were going to be in a car with people where people aren't actively listening to music, or you're going to be in the woods without music. That's really intriguing to me because I am a person for whom music is also very important. But I would never be able to have described myself as being someone who like just wouldn't go a couple hours or whatever without music on. Like I always have music on in the car. But I am not a person who walks around with headphones in to listen to music.
Nope.
And I know you're not either, but you have mentioned before about having a lot of, like having music on when you work, but not wanting it to be music that distracts you because you can hear lyrics
Right.
or something. I would
Yep.
say I only do that about half the time. Sometimes it's nice to sit in silence.
Interesting.
Yeah, I don't feel, well, I don't know about feelings, but I definitely am not of that such that if I had had the experience you had, it wouldn't have been. Now I don't work in the music industry and I never did. So there's that other layer to it. But this just harkens back a little bit to some of the other things that you and I have written down in our little notes sheet. One of which is boredom, which maybe this is getting off on a tangent that we don't want to go to yet, but there's like that stupid saying that gets attributed to, I've even mentioned it here before. I think like people think Mark Twain said it, but I actually think Blaise Pascal said it about all of man's problems stem from his inability to sit alone with his thoughts.
Yep.
Now I don't imagine you're like listening to music purely because you want to distract yourself from thinking.
Nope.
In fact, it's the other way around. I know,
Very much
for
so.
many people it is, but there's something about this notion of
Stillness.
when yes, and when things feel alive or dead. Okay. And again, if you'll indulge me, there's one more thread I kind of want to pull into this, which is in one of our recent episodes we were talking about burnout and boredom, and I can't remember if this is one that where it lived and whether it's something our listeners heard or not, but you made a comment about when you're in the work that you're doing, you get energy from tossing ideas out there or kind of connecting people to things and having people be like, oh, okay, let's go. And then so when you are doing something or trying to do something like that and it's met with just blank stares and like, nah, that's not energizing for you. Maybe even the opposite, right?
Yep.
So I wonder, as a person who is not wired that way, whether the experience of encountering the opposite of aliveness. I don't want to be like deadness because I don't know, because I
Right.
think that's kind of my point I'm trying to very slowly and roundaboutly make, is that sometimes one can confuse stillness and like depth for deadness.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just kind of connecting this with this idea that like not having music on isn't the absence of music, right?
Mm.
There's still a shit ton of other things that can be happening in the silence. It
Mm-hmm.
could be other sounds if you're outside or wherever you're at. It could also just be true silence. Even silence isn't empty to me or dead. So
Nope.
like, and then tying that to the notion of boredom and or those times when your efforts are met with blank faces or flat walls. These are all kind
Hmm.
of like triple orbiting each other, and I'm kind of curious to hear about your reaction to this, that I'm just like serving up without a question, because I am like sensing some weird connections to the nature of
Huh.
aliveness and then stillness, and stillness not always being deadness. And if you gain energy from reactions of aliveness and things being connected, what about the scenarios that are actually asking for getting quiet, dialing in, moving from connecting and generating to maintenance and convergence and whatever? So like, and those don't always
Mm-hmm.
feel the same as the alive. Anyway, so
I've never connected those things, but I'm not going to leave it alone at that because I want
okay.
to. I want to run with this. But I've never connected that before, so I'm going to think out loud a little bit. I think, because I know what you're talking about. I know folks that like can't do stillness because then they get left alone with their thoughts, and they're like, I don't want to ruminate. I don't want to think. I need stimuli that is distraction from
Yeah.
something else. Fair. That's not it. For me, it has so much more to do with focus and the that music. When I'm working, it's a white noise of like wall of noise metal, sort of monodynamic, monotone metal that just goes. And I can't understand the lyrics anyway because it's death metal usually or instrumental. Or I want real ambient stuff that is very
Right.
full but not engaging for the most part. More drony. But it's for the sake of focus. When it comes to being met with that sort of blank face kind of thing, I think that's not necessarily the absence of focus, but I am relating it in some way. Maybe there's a better word for it, but it is the it's a dead end maybe, and not that like it's that the connection or the continuity is broken. Not so dead end is probably the wrong way to think about it so much as the continuity gets broken, where a lot of the focus sort of is sort of in line with that need for some continuity. Although usually when I'm engaging other people, I'm looking for a hop, for some sort of refraction of that continuity. I want it to like bounce off of people and absorb into people and then stop being the straight line and truly refract into other directions. When it's sort of a blank response, then I don't know if it's passing at all, to continue with the light analogy. But to pile on with the focus, we might have talked about this when we were talking about noise at one point, but one of the exercises that I went through regularly with folks that I worked with when I was doing sound design was working in movies, and the people in the studio, we would like get on a subway, or we would, we'd go to another studio, we'd visit other places in the city, and we'd be recording things out in the field from time to time. And when we had a moment, we would try to prompt each other and say, name 5 things you hear right now. Did I mention this? Do you remember
No,
me bringing
I
this
don't
up?
think so.
5 things is kind of an arbitrary thing. This is
Yeah.
a very cool meditation. So, name 5 things that you hear right now. And when you're on a street in Midtown Manhattan, it's, 5 is like, I got 5 right now. When do you want me to stop, kind of thing. When you're on a subway, similar sort of thing. But when you're in a quiet waiting room and you're sitting there and you're saying, I hear pens falling on desks. I hear the whir of the air conditioner. I hear the ding of an elevator down a hallway, those sort of things. You're really shifting your attention to what are all of those things. And then I'm going to absorb them and kind of make that the central focus and loudness almost. And that's an exercise, because when we go back and we're doing the sound effects editing, we're putting those in movies, I had to sit there oftentimes and just put air conditioning noise in movies, door sounds opening and closing in movies, which is nothing exciting at all. It was actually like almost torture to do that kind of stuff and listen to that sort of stuff all day long. But at the same time, there was something cool about we sort of have this immunity to a lot of those sounds because they just become normalized in our day-to-day patterns, that actually pausing and focusing on the things that we've eliminated, we've muted out for the sake of other things we want to give attention to, is a great practice. I've kept that going since then as an interesting meditation. And now with the kids, when we're out places, we don't like just hand them a tablet or a phone or something and say, here, go entertain yourselves. I'll sit down and say, what are you hearing right now? What are you seeing? What are you noticing right now? Name some of the things that are around you. Ask some questions about some of the things that are around you. And so it was more of a meditation. It still is to an extent, but now with the kids, it's an incredible way of calling out the noticing practice, and deliberately engaging in it. That's what I want to say.
Yeah, I some people I know call that, or variations on that, like a grounding activity. I know some people who've learned it from like therapy, which the first time someone shared it with me, I was like, what? But I understood the context, which was if that person was feeling a little bit untethered, it was like grounding. And it was like, name 5 things you can see, 4 things you can hear, 3 things you can touch, 2 things you can smell, and like 1 thing you can taste, or something along those lines. But this hits on, again, I know we have talked about this. I'm always so like, at this point, I'm so preemptively apologetic for saying something I've said 8 times on this like YouTube channel before, but sorry,
we need to
y'all.
take inventory at some point.
Nobody watches all of them anymore. They just watch the last one anyways. It doesn't matter. But but I'm a broken record about the low latent inhibition stuff. I think especially
we haven't dug into that yet.
Well,
so,
this
please.
is related, and this is related to the sensory processing sensitivity topic, which I want to just caveat. So there is sensory sensitivity disorder out there that is different. So like a sensory processing disorder is a whole different beast that we're not talking about here from simply sensory processing sensitivity. It's too bad these words get used so closely to each other. Sensory processing sensitivity is also lumped in with and often just described holistically, like the same as when people are a highly sensitive person. That concept, it's from the same originating research. And being a highly sensitive person is a weird thing to talk about as an identity. Again, it's just their way of putting it into a noun form, right? Instead of like something somebody does. But regardless, it's a genetic thing. Like there are genes associated with it, and like a certain percentage of any population in both human and animal species have that gene expression. And it is associated with, they're not the same by any means, but it's associated with that low latent inhibition concept, which briefly I will explain again. I know I have on here at least once or twice, but it's just this idea that, and you mentioned this, you use the word immunity, I think. The brain naturally, when it comes to familiar information, starts to kind of filter it out and stop paying conscious attention to it. It's obviously still taking it in, but you aren't consciously aware of it because that becomes cognitively taxing, and the brain is a miser, and why spend the glucose on stuff you don't need to spend it on? So this thing is familiar, it's safe, it's doing what it's predicted to do, I'm not going to pay attention to it. And so that's called latent inhibition, that we all exercise to some extent, like automatically. But there are individuals, for whatever reason, who have low latent inhibition, which simply means the brain just does that less, which means it does less filtering of familiar things. You have less, you build that immunity to things you know less, and therefore things remain, you have a little bit more sensitivity to things, even if they aren't novel. So this is where they link up for me. I mean, they are like somewhat correlated too. My research has suggested that they are. This is something I'm just perpetually interested in and kind of always reading the latest research on. But as a person who experiences this, I very rarely feel overwhelmed. That's why I always like to differentiate the fact that the sensory processing disorder is very different from what we're talking about here. Because while I have experienced sensory overload in my life, for the most part, that is not the dynamic we're on here. It just means that I notice shit, and I have my whole life. So I swear I'm bringing this back around now. You know, this like exercise, which I think is very grounding. I think is very meditative in some ways, but also just grounding for a human in their world to get out of that floaty, untethered, dissociated place we can sometimes get and kind of be where we are in the moment. It's both grounding, but also it does cultivate and build that habit of noticing that we've talked about in past shows, all of which become really, really useful for a lot of the kind of consultative or advisory or complexity informed work that we're talking about on this thing. This is right. So, but I remember the first time I encountered that exercise, and in perhaps one part naive and maybe one part arrogant, like Jen, I was like, you guys aren't doing this all the time? Like, this isn't just happening automatically all the time for you? You know, and this was me very young, having to realize, wait a minute, not everyone doesn't experience this constantly. And I don't mean that I consciously am literally asking, what are 5 things I hear? What are 5 things I hear? What are 5 things I hear? It just is, as someone who has low latent inhibition, the threshold of things I notice, I think, is just lower. And it's not across the board. There's all kinds of stuff I don't notice that other people I know notice and call out, and they're like, whoa, did you notice blah? And I'm like, no. But the notion of that grounding exercise is a way for, I think, people to cultivate the habits that other people like me just came out of the womb with and sometimes wish we didn't have. Also, this makes it sound like I'm of a special subspecies of human who like does this thing that's really special. No, it's just brain wiring, and it's also not always awesome. Sometimes I do wish I could turn it off. It is correlated with higher levels of schizophrenia in the populations that have this, and higher levels of creativity, however you measure that, which is horseshit. And there's some interesting theories around whatever the brain wiring is that leads to this could also be responsible for why schizophrenics lose touch with reality and they seek patterns everywhere. Because if you are a person who notices everything as if it's novel, everything seems important, everything is significant, and the significance of things starts to warp your pattern recognition such that everything is connected in the conspiracy theory / schizophrenic sense of everything is connected, not in the culturally sanctioned interdependent way we talk about everything is connected, right? Like, everything is connected can also mean mental illness, and you know, and not just kumbaya, everything is connected, y'all need to get your mind right. Like, there's a lot of that power there we're going to talk about some other time. But anyway, so I'm rambling at this point, but I just find this intriguing because in our last conversation about burnout, the other thing that came out of that I made note of, aside from the boredom stuff, was this concept of sensitivity. And in the same way you might talk about an instrument having like a high sensitivity, like we talked about in one of our recent chats, if you are working in a way or in a context or inside an organization that affords you opportunities to get out of the constant spray of whatever is sensory or is information, and do either the detox metaphor or a tolerance break. I know I used that phrase in a past one too, right? And if you consume a lot of caffeine or, you know, cannabis, people take breaks because their tolerance gets so much that it's like, I have to have so much to even have an effect. So like whichever metaphor you want, taking a break, getting into a sensory deprivation chamber, whatever the metaphor is, I think if you work in an environment where you can get that respite from constant exposure to the very things that are triggering any kind of overwhelm or overload, or dialing the thing all the way up so that it, you know, we've buried the needle or whatever you want to talk about it, you may not need those breaks, the big breaks, or you might not flirt with, you know, burnout so much. But if the work you do has you in kind of constant noticing mode, and if part of what you have to be doing is drinking from an information fire hose and constantly noticing and scanning, and if you're naturally a connector and you're doing all this and noticing it constantly, if you've got low latent inhibition, life is an information fire hose. So if you're not putting yourself in a metaphorical sensory deprivation chamber on a regular basis, you will absolutely burn the fuck out. So that was a lot that I just lobbed, but I wondered, because of the way that you talked about that exercise, I was like, oh, this is intriguing that it loops back again, because to me that's what a lot of burnout comes down to, is sensory overload just expanded to include work.
Yeah. Okay. There's a lot of different things I want to run with, but do you find that there's in the way that you're constant in noticing and drinking from the fire hose, is that universal, or is there still some context to it? And the reason I'm asking is because I will often say to my wife, like, when the kids have toys everywhere and it's cluttered, I can feel my cortisol starting to like explode, because like there's just clutter everywhere. Like, can we just like, and I finally was able to kind of say it. Like, now I get it. It is just, there's just too much stimuli. Yeah. I'm just constantly in this sort of like lighthouse sort of mode, where I'm scanning and I'm taking it all in and I'm just noticing everything. And she kind of laughed and was like, I've never met anyone that trips over every dog toy that ever gets left on the floor. Like, you manage to not know that it's there. How are you noticing everything if you can't see under your own nose and you step on every Lego imaginable, every dog toy that's on the floor? Trip on anything that has the opportunity to trip anyone. I'm like, I don't know. I don't have an answer for that. But I know this is true, and I agree with what you're saying. So, do you find that it's universal?
It's not universal. It's certainly context specific, but also what you're talking about kind of hints at like a bodily, like proprioception too. So just because we're talking sensory, you know, in a cognitive sense, like it's not always the same as how it might show up with my own awareness of where my body's at in space, which I don't experience this, but I know to be, you know, an issue. And you talked briefly about this even in the other episode when we were talking about, you know, being ADHD or on the spectrum or different forms of neurodiversity. But like, my understanding of many folks who are neurodivergent is that proprioception and your sense of your body in space and in the world is tricky at times. I actually, ironically, was not really athletic as a kid, even though I think we might have talked about these stories, but I never struggled to know where my body was in space though. And as I got later in life into different forms of activity that involved a little bit more weird stuff, like being upside down on a pole and figuring out, wait, which way is up and down, and my left on the bottom is the right up here now, what is happening, or just any kind of dance or other type of movement based activity, you know, certain forms of yoga, turned out to be an area that I was like, I really have a really strong sense of where my body is in space. I'm just not good at a lot of sports because those require a lot of other things that I don't have, like natural quickness or mobility. But anyway, because you mentioned it, that was the other piece. I was like, yeah, there's a bodily sort of form of this that isn't the same as the cognitive one. But I think it's important to say, yeah, it's not universal, but it also isn't. It isn't like it applies more in A but not in B, or like it's just fluid. And I think about it almost more like a baseline, because I think every human I think everybody has some level of, like maybe baseline that they operate with from like this is like a nature versus nurture kind of thing, right? Like just by nature, by like genetic, biological programming, probably has a baseline level of latent inhibition and a certain level of sensitivity to sensory input. And then I think there is, no matter where your baseline is, some amount of window of flexibility that is probably on one hand something that can be modulated and even cultivated by the individual with intention if you want to engage in certain habits, exercises, practices that cultivate attention and curiosity and noticing, and what you're doing with your kids, right? You're building that muscle memory for noticing, right, so that like at some point, they'll probably have fond memories of that, but like if they're just doing that stuff as a matter of course, then they're doing exactly what we're talking about. They're conditioning. It's like going to the gym and they're building that muscle, right? So even if later they stop doing it, there's some wired, from like a maybe neurocognitive sense, the to the comparison with weightlifting, the muscle memories there, even if at times the muscle itself is increased or decreased in capacity. So I think there's a baseline, and then I think there's a sort of an amount that is maybe the nurture and not just the nature that you can add to your sensory sensitivity. And then on top of that, there is the context part of it, which is, again, where I know you asked, like 100% it varies. And I've often asked, as a person who does feel that kind of experience of sensory sensitivity, again, I find it odd that even though I think that is true for myself, and the various instruments that I have been tested with over my life, the quizzes or what have you, some more formal than others, they all indicate it to be the case, but I do not experience the downsides of it. I've read a book or two about being a highly sensitive person, and I was like, I get the science that's being described here, but my experience of being a sensitive person have not borne out the challenges that I am seeing and empathizing that other people are having. And I'm like, this is interesting. Why is that? I love metal, as we talk about. I go to a metal show. Standing in the middle of an audience at a metal show is like sensory overload central, especially the discordant type of stuff that I like to listen to, because it's both visually a lot going on and obviously from an audio perspective very busy, lots of things happening. Physically, touch-wise, there's just a mass of bodies around me. The shows I'm going to are often in smaller venues. We're packed like sardines. Okay, this isn't like I'm sitting in a seat in a large venue or something. Like I'm on a flat floor, smelling and touching people. Like by all definitions, I should be icked and like touched the fuck out by things like that, but I don't. And so it's something I find a little bit mystical in a way that it's almost like I don't even want to like research why that is. I have actually found some good research out there as to why that is, but we'll save that for later. It is absolutely context dependent, but I think it's even more than that. It's just a very nuanced combination of what is probably nature and then active decision to nurture and then context, sensitivity that is not even in my control. I think that's true for all of us, regardless of where the baseline starts.
So you're making me think about metronomes. And like the things that draw our attention, even despite all of the stimuli, because I'm the same way with metal shows. But to me, it's all of the music and the fact that it's just a lot of people everywhere. That all like the focus becomes I'm staring down at the stage where all the lighting is and where all the sound is coming from, and there's one program for the most part. And it's overwhelming everything else. And there's a lot going on, but I'm able to like zoom in and hit the one. And the contrast to that, a couple nights ago, we brought the kids to the Bluey Theater performance that's on tour right now. It was a blast. And it was a big theater venue, like seated, balcony and everything. Probably, I don't know, you get like 1,500 people in that room or so, full of kids that are all talking nonstop. And every once in a while, it's rare. A lot of my neurodivergent, more on that identify more in the autistic spectrum, they they tell me the stories about this all the time, but I only experience this very, very rarely. But I had it the other night, where when there's just so much noise going on and everything's at the same exact volume level or so, it all sort of just evens out into this just mush. And I realize, like, people are talking to me, and I just kind of go into this sort of like trance of like, I'm just nodding along as people are talking. I'm not interacting with any. I'm just kind of like, I don't know, like numbed by the whole experience. And so I was kind of, I don't remember much of the performance because I was just sort of, that was happening. There was a lot going on elsewhere, but it wasn't my metronome. This wasn't the typical space that I find myself in. There wasn't one thing drawing enough of my attention to sort of mute everything else out, which is what I use music for when I'm working and where I need it. Not need it, but I'm I don't know. It's I don't even like give it a second thought. I sit down at my computer and the first thing I open up is my music collection and I pick something and I start playing it. And this is why when people send me podcasts, I'm like, I don't know. There's no window in my world where I'm going to listen to this for the most part. That's not always. I will set aside big chunks of time to get caught up on stuff in some cases. But for the most part, like, I can't listen to people talking throughout the day. I just need music going almost nonstop. And when it's time to like kick the kids off TV and all right, like go build some stuff and go read, go make some stuff, I turn on background music every single time. There's music just going. And in the car, same sort of thing. But I'm also that old guy that there's heavy traffic right now. I got to turn the music down a little bit.
I mean, we put music on when we're cooking. We have it on during the day, especially if Brian's working from home. Like, he's sitting at the dining room table, I'm on the couch, and he's got music playing on he'll put something on because we have the speaker over where he's at. Like, but it definitely isn't to, like, help with anything other than it creates a pleasant aesthetic experience. But, like, focus has nothing to do with it.
I know that I'm only calling out focus with work because if I turn on Public Enemy, I'm not focused on work anymore. I'm listening to Public Enemy or a podcast. I'm listening to the podcast.
I could probably put a podcast on while I worked and it wouldn't bother me. I wouldn't pay attention to it is the challenge. Like, I would miss what I was listening to. Which I will actually sometimes do if I have something that's been recorded, not like this, but just something that's been recorded that I just need to make sure. I need to watch it all the way through to make sure there's no just blank blip or something like that, but I know that I don't need to listen to the words. I'll just put it on while I'm working and then just make sure that it doesn't pause or mess itself up on the way. But, like, it doesn't prevent me from focusing on what I need to focus on. But it means I won't actually hear it, you know? And, like, I definitely I often think about it as, like, the depth of field change in a camera, like, that I will be focused in on whatever's in my foreground. Like, I'm deciding what's in the foreground. And I get to control that. I feel like I, for whatever reason, have pretty good control over that. And then at times, I'll notice if there's music on. Something might draw my attention to it, but usually it's not just, oh, I can hear the vocals, or just, oh, there's something to latch onto. It is truly something novel, or there's an anomaly, or, one of us puts on something that's a little bit new, and so then I'll pause and be like, do I like this? This is doing XYZ. Clean vocals. Ew, no. All right, I'll give it a chance. Like, there's stuff like that, right? But there's just a depth of field shift that's happening that I feel like I'm still deciding. Like, my hand is on the camera lens and I'm doing the depth of field shifting. And I don't know why I have that ability. I have this really, really, I'm like a little concerned that I sound like I think I'm just hot shit because I like notice shit and I can focus. Everybody, I notice a lot of things and I can focus. Like, fuck all y'all. Like, I swear to God, I don't feel that way. But it really becomes stark in its contrast to what I know to be true for so many people that I know and love and my friends. And I mean, I know other people who notice more than I do and can focus better than I can do. So it's not so much that. It's just, I reflect sometimes about like why that might be. Because I'm curious how that could be constructive or useful for others. Or even in my work with clients, I think about like, what does this mean for how I am working that might be different from how clients or collaborators I'm working with engage? Because I can't expect everybody to work with the same instincts around focus or notice the same things that I notice. So, but I don't have good answers. Like I said, I do like research this, but it's kind of a fluid state as far as all the research around attention and cognition.
So interesting. In total contrast, I just said to somebody like a week ago or so, I said a neurodivergent is never late, nor are they early. They arrive precisely when the universe permits them. Because, and this was in a conversation about our ADHD, how, like, if there's something more interesting going on, it's just going to take my attention. And it's not that it's taking my attention. I'm going to give it my attention. And if that means that I lose time or I lose the ability to
So
show
you
up somewhere
own that
on
you're
time
making a
sometimes,
choice.
to an extent, yeah, the time loss thing is where it starts to, I lose agency. Because the number of times that somebody says to me, can you do a thing or can you, and I go, yep, no problem. If there's not an alarm that pulls me away, I can like, holy shit, an hour just went by. I was supposed to get up
Yeah.
and do something else 15 minutes ago.
Are
That
you
is a
when you
constant struggle.
when you experience that, is it like flow? Is it like a flow state? Would you compare it to that notion, like Chick-Manzali's like concept of flow, or is it not? Is it different?
I think I attribute flow to when there is something obviously energizing, but it's not that at all. It's sometimes like, I mean, hell, like I'll look at the clock. It's 11 o'clock at night. All right, I'm just gonna click on this interesting thing from YouTube that just popped up, and before I know it, I've clicked on 24 things, and it's 3 o'clock in the morning, and I've got a number of other pages open, and I'm reading about mushroom poisoning. Just I don't know how I got there. I started with radiation somewhere, and I ended in mushroom poisoning. I don't know. And then I realized like 3-4 hours has gone by, and there's no way that 3-4. But it's also that like body perception. I'm like, oh, and I'm starving. Where did that come from? Holy shit! Like that happens all the time. So maybe that's flow, but
See,
it doesn't.
I
Feel quite
experience
the
that,
same. Okay.
but I don't do that or experience that when I need to do something else. Do you know what I mean? This is what I'm really curious
No,
about, because
I don't know what you mean at all.
yeah, so like so much of what I read when people write about like time blindness or the various time loss kind of experiences that we're onto here, that like some of it I'm like, yeah, who doesn't? And then I was like, wait, not there are plenty of people who I'm sure don't. But like 100%, whoops, I've just spent the last 4 hours like down 18 rabbit holes and blah blah. How did it get from 11 to 3 a.m.? Right there with you. But what I don't struggle with is, because that's an environment where I'm not beholden to, nor do I have a commitment to anybody else or any other thing. So it's almost kind of like the little guy, in my head is like, all right, you're on your own, guys, have fun. Like everybody off duty, at ease, soldiers, And, but during the day, or if there's something, or even like on a night where I'm like, I need to go to bed early because I need to get a full 8 hours or whatever of sleep because of this thing I'm doing tomorrow. I need to make sure I'm rested for it. I can start down that rabbit hole, and then it's like the depth of field thing shifts from whatever I'm looking at in my foreground to now shifts to my own body. How am I feeling? How am I positioned? What am I doing? It's time to go to sleep. Can I like cut this and be done with it and put the phone down or put the laptop down or turn the movie off or turn the music off or whatever it is I'm doing? And
Interesting.
I don't necessarily feel like I'm employing any particular tactics. I'm not doing something that like you get taught to do for like time management. I'm not using tools, trips, or like it's just, at some point, if I haven't felt myself in my body in a X amount of time that I don't know what is, it's unconscious, like breathing. At some point, my body just checks back in on itself. And what this is making me wonder is like, 'cause this is something that has grown for me over the years. I wish I could tell you I'm like, I figured it out. Like, I don't know how or why, but I was not as good at this when I was a kid. And I now think that probably to some extent, any practices that do involve grounding and being in the body, when I first started doing yoga, seriously, with commitment, multiple times a week, it was a lot more impactful on me than I think I realized at the time. Now looking back, I have conversations like this where I go, I wonder if that is part of where and how this started to shift for me, because it's not a conscious set a timer, use these tools, brick your phone. It's never an external, that puts the locus of control outside yourself. But for me, the locus of control over this attentional shift is inside me. And while sometimes I'm conscious of it, a lot of times I'm not. And there's some, and I joked about a little guy, but you know, there's no homunculus in there. It's like my own body is the guy. And my own body basically says, hey, let's shift from foreground to body here for a minute and check in. I think that might be something that started to become available to me in greater capacity when I really started to take seriously certain forms of embodied practice, but not embodied kumbaya consciousness raising practice. I mean, getting sweaty, playing hockey, and being uncomfortable because it hurts and sometimes is uncomfortable to play hockey, and it feels gross to be sweaty in the pads and on a summer day in a hockey rink, and just accepting it. And then the same thing with yoga. When I talk of yoga here, I'm talking about Bikram yoga. I mean, fuck Bikram, but I started doing Bikram yoga, and I've never liked any other form of yoga I had ever tried prior to that. But Bikram I liked because it's hot, it's uncomfortable, and it's just you in the mirror. They don't touch you. They just say a dialogue, and it's the same dialogue every single class, everywhere you go, any studio in the country. So there's your enabling constraint. There's your scaffolding. And then it's you and the body in the mirror. And I'm like, like, where are my listeners at out there who also feel relatively unencumbered by the attentional challenges that I think are pervasive to this day? Raise your hand and like, what else do you do with your body? Because I feel like this might be part of it.
Here's how far on the opposite end of the world I am. When I have to when I have a doctor's appointment at 10 o'clock, my morning is shut down.
I know that experience. I'm the same way with that a lot.
When I have to fly somewhere, if I have to catch a flight, forget it. The whole day is just, can I make that on time? And that's where all of my attention, I don't commit to anything else because it's just no way. That's not going to happen.
Yeah.
So the ability to just be into the rhythm of necessity or attention or whatever, it's I have an Amazon device who I won't call by name behind me, and throughout the first thing I do in the morning now is I open up my calendar and I start setting alarms on that, so it starts going off and that lets me know that I need to be here. And if I have to go, I have stuff that's automatically set for somebody has to get off the bus, and so it's time to go. I have stuff set for us to it's time for us to put our shoes on so we can get out the door, that kind of stuff. It's going off nonstop, but there is something that will generate the attention always.
There's definitely a role for cognitive offloading of some of these things. If I was managing children, if I had a lot more things to manage in my day, I would probably be doing very much the same. And I still look at a calendar and make sure, the night before and the day of. And I have the experience of, I've got a certain call at 10 a.m., so I know I'm not going to do anything really that involved. I have that experience. But it's almost I think it's a matter of attunement. Which, again, I am sensitive to say because so much of this conversation ends up sounding like someone... It could be mistaken for someone who doesn't experience some of these things thinking they're somehow better, which I don't. But I think it's a function of attunement and attunement to and between the cognitive and intellectualized space you occupy, the bodily space. And I don't, when I say embodied, like I was saying earlier, I'm not even talking about somatic and forms of practice that are aiming to connect things or to experience a level of connection or attunement to the environment. I'm not even at that level. I'm literally just talking about your presence inside your own body and being a body, not just a mind, and I don't know how that attunement comes to be. How do you, what were you going to say?
So there's something that's really, cause I'm going back to a previous conversation that we had, which is how we both adapted these things over time, where the way these things presented for you was you could sit down and read a book and just absorb the entire thing and then go to school, and if you wanted to like run with it, you'd run with it, and that was great. The way it presented for me was I'm going to go wander in traffic until somebody like grabbed me by the neck and pulled me out, or I got hit by a car or something. And so those things didn't serve me. And so there was this constant constraint, multiple constraints, this assemblage of fix it, figure it out.
Yeah.
Where it sounded like you didn't quite have that. It wasn't to the opposite extent necessarily of go frolic and express yourself, but it wasn't quite the like get your shit together sort of response.
I was not told by individuals in my life who had power over me I needed to fix it. I was told at all turns by society that I needed to fix it, but I generally didn't listen to that. But the people in my life who had a greater level of leverage over my time and what I had access to did not generally tell me to fix it.
That seems like an interesting differentiator when it comes to this, of like you self-adopted things over time, just like naturally sort of like to move through the space to what was where mine, there was some things that were certainly like I'm fine, and certainly as I've gotten older it's become more, and I've become more sort of cognizant of these things, that I've kind of said I'm just going to go with my thing, because my thing I'm going to self-direct on this, and that's fine. But it follows 35 years of, can you take notes? What if you got yourself a day planner? Like those sort of like the generic ADHD coaching that people and society in general were offering. But it was, my adaptations were mostly under duress for most of my life to work with this. And so my response to I'm not going to do anything on the day that I have to fly somewhere. It's not a response. When I think about it, it's not because I want to make sure I make time for that flight, so much as it is the anxiety of the build up into that, of like I have to make space for the anxiety to do its thing more than anything else. Yeah, that's very different. You were going to go somewhere, but I do have a question that's going to no? Okay.
Just keep,
so,
yeah.
I want to circle back just a little bit. When you're doing the grounding exercise, that is sort of constant, without actually calling it an exercise, it's just sort of normalized.
Without being conscious of it.
Do you do it with people?
Yeah, and and alone, both.
Okay.
A big plus in my life has been the people in my life who made that something that I could do with them, even if they aren't doing it. The like penguin rock thing or whatever, like I'm giving you a stone, like penguins give each other little rocks as gifts. A lot of people like to use this example, or the joke we use in my household is like, because as a kid you'd be like, look at this cool rock I found, and you'd show it to somebody, and they could either be like, fuck, what are you showing me this for? Or they could be like, oh, that's very cool. I think that if you think about a habit of or cultivating a practice of noticing, like this exercise we've talked about, it's dependent on if you're doing it with other people, those other people obviously both being receptive and reciprocal. But also it's not always with other people. And over the course of my life, like I would probably say that for the earliest part of my life, it was usually not something I was doing in any outward way. I was just noticing shit, and like many things, like I said earlier, I assumed everybody did it the same way. Like if we were talking about rainbows, like just as a brief aside, okay? People who know me know I love rainbows. I've loved things that are in rainbow gradient order, like putting aside like pride symbolic stuff which is also lovely and wonderful, but like well before that was even like a thing, like I just since before I can remember, that's how young, I've just always been drawn to and really love a rainbow gradient of color. I see if I see it in nature, like naturally, like in an oil slick, or if like bottles somewhere just happen to accidentally be in rainbow order, especially if it's a complete rainbow, I just find it so visually pleasing. It's like insane. Okay, so that's
and that's true Roy G. Biv.
Yeah, so there's rules I won't get into. Like people quiz me about this. I'm like, I want a full Roy G. Biv if we can get it. Red, yellow, green, blue will suffice. But like if it's Roy G. Biv, but just like no orange, it like doesn't do it for me. Okay. Now I've always assumed, as a kid, you don't know any better, so I always assumed everyone thought rainbows were pleasant. And at some point, I'm like in my 20s, I'm dating my boyfriend, now husband, and you know, we're like talking or walking or something. He knows I like when things are rainbow order. And I'm not like obsessive. I like everything in my house isn't in rainbow order or anything like that. I just find it visually pleasant. I have things with rainbow-ish stuff on them, but like I don't have like rainbows and like Lisa Frank stuff everywhere. I was a Lisa Frank Trapper Keeper kid, yes, but I remember just walking past something and something in a window was like almost rainbow, but not quite. It was missing a color. And he was like, "Do you like that shirt?" And I was like, "No, why?" He's like, "Well, it's rainbow." And I'm like, "That's not rainbow." And like in that moment was when I learned at like 25 that not every human can look at like an array of colors and just like know instantly if it's perfect rainbow order. And he was like, "Well, he's like, I have to go through and like do the red, orange, yellow, green." He has to go through and it only takes him 2 seconds, but he still has to do that consciously. I don't. I just look and know. Just look and know. This is not a super cool like superpower. This is a dumb fucking thing about my brain. But that, like everything else we are talking about, so the noticing that I do, it's just a thing my brain did, and I did not know that other people didn't do it. So I never talked to anybody about it for a long time because I thought it was everybody. And then as I got older, you know, you start to sometimes share things or you start to engage in a way where it's like, wait, you're a fucking weirdo for that. And then I just kept it to myself. And then as you get older and you find some people in your life who get you, which is like life's greatest fucking gift, right? Then you get to the point where you actually can be reciprocal about it and the other people in your life are doing it too. So you doing that with your kids is like awesome. It's fucking awesome, right? Like we should stop and give more praise to that. But also just the forms that can show up informally and organically in friendships or in interactions. And it's one of the reasons why anytime anybody ever comments on something, no matter how mundane or pedestrian or stupid or silly it seems, I'm always here for it because I love seeing what other people notice, regardless of whether I notice it or not. You might think it's like, oh, I love when other people notice things I didn't. No, even if the thing they notice is the exact same thing I noticed, I don't care. Like anytime someone is like, there's a bird out there, or there's a this, or I heard of check out this thing I saw earlier today, you know, look at this cool rock I found. Let me see, that's fucking awesome. Because it's another way of cultivating that habit, both for yourself and encouraging its cultivation in others without having to like do the formal exercise. It's just being the person who I wander around in the world, and when someone bumps into me and we have an interaction like that, and then through whatever social interaction later it reinforces like, hey, notice a thing, share a thing. Like with birds, which I'm not like anybody my age, I've like obviously gotten into birds a little bit, but I'm not like trying to collect rare bird sightings. Give me like a boring ass American robin. I'll watch it hop around in the backyard all day long, man. Like there's a level of that. So again, way too long of an answer for what you asked, but the short answer is both with and without people.
That's so, and this is where not where I'm going with this, but this is what when we talk about sense-making or participatory sense-making, this is kind of what it comes down to me is, what are you hearing? What are 5 things you hear right now? And how do you articulate it, more importantly? There's this story I remember that has stuck with me long before I knew anything about sense-making. 25 years ago, I probably heard this story, where somebody was talking about... I hope I didn't mention this here. If I didn't mention it, this is the right context to mention it again. They were driving cross country. These 2 roommates, these college roommates, they were driving across country, and one of them was from Oklahoma or West Texas or something like that, and one was from like Denver or Utah or something. One grew up in the mountains, and one grew up in the like flatness of the world. And they're in the car together, and one of them, I don't remember which it was, the driver or the passenger, but one of them. They both noticed a thing on the road in front of them that looked like it might have been somewhat large. And the one from the mountains panicked and either hit the brakes or expected the driver to hit the brakes. And the one from West Texas was unfazed. And after going through that, they prompted each other, and the one guy was like, obviously it's a boulder, and that when there's one boulder, there's multiple boulders. Like there's a giant rock in the road. You can't not drive into it. Like, avoid that. Just stop and then let's like evaluate the scene. And the one from West Texas was like, it's a dust bunny, or it's a tumbleweed. It's gonna move on its own. It won't be there by the time we get there. Or like, you just kind of swerve around it a little bit. It's not going to affect us at all. But the both of them are staring at the same exact thing, and all of their experience and history was playing into a reaction to that same exact thing that was very, very divergent. And to me, that's like sense making at its absolute core. Is that how do we respond and react and know that thing, but being able to externalize that and have it become a group experience suddenly, where all of that history and experience and response becomes in open air and then collectively experienced in that kind of way, is what's really fascinating to me. And when we got to do it through we're all sitting on a subway, what are 5 things you hear, and we got to talk about it, we also started to notice, like, I grew up a little upstate. Some of these things that I didn't ride a subway every day of my life until I went to college, and now those things that I hear are still muted out by people that grew up in Queens and rode subways 5 times a day.
Yeah.
Yes, we're giving attention to it, but I don't want to, for anyone listening, I don't want to suggest that just pausing and listening creates this absence of subjectivity in the fact that it's still highly subjective.
Oh, yeah.
And so it being a personal experience is fine, but being a group experience is amazing.
Yeah, and I think that to your point, I mean, if it's something you're doing solo, it's a practice. And I don't mean a practice that is always conscious, but it's something you're doing. People experience, like we talk a lot about this, you hear people say a lot about when you travel, right? Obviously, you're in a new environment, you can't help but notice shit because you're constantly scanning to figure shit out, right? And it's very cognitively taxing. And then you go back home and you probably experience your home world in a new way until that sensory, until that latent inhibition kicks back in. But this also brings up, like, so as you were talking, I was thinking about, so what is the difference between noticing and sense making? And like this notion of sense making being that you are trying to make sense of the world so you can do something, take action. Like there's an implied, what we want to do something, or even just to be a certain way. I just want to be, even if I'm not trying to make a decision or make a change or whatever. But it isn't just noticing. Like we're trying to make sense out of noticings. And taking the driving example, which is like a really great illustration of, like the cognitive diversity kind of concept of a lot of what we're into about, and lived experience and path dependency and all of that, right? There was something on the road, and it was one thing. It wasn't
it demanded attention.
A boulder. It wasn't a boulder and a tumbleweed and a dog or a deer or an animal or something. It wasn't many things at once. Like this is where new materialism comes in, and we won't have to go down that rabbit hole today. But like this is where the question of the tensions between like social constructivism and we can collectively construct meaning around what happened, but there is also the fact that there's a physical thing on the road.
Right.
And so what benefits us as a group most as far as how we might engage with when we encounter a thing on the road? Not to say like, is Colorado guy or Texas guy right or wrong, because it kind of doesn't matter. Maybe it was a tumbleweed and like Texas guy was right. Like that's not the point. But the point isn't also just, what did everyone think it was? I thought it was a rock. I thought it was a tumbleweed. I thought it was a buffalo. Oh, aren't we a great like diverse group? And we're really folding in all these epistemic, like, right. The point is still at some point in the process, usually we are trying to generate collective understanding to enable something more desirable about a future state than a current state. And so then the question is like, how might we decide as a group what to do, either with this thing in the road or the future next thing we encounter in the road? how do we take advantage of the fact that Texas guy is going to err on the side of tumbleweed and Colorado guy is going to err on the side of boulder? How can we arrange ourselves so that that benefits us? That's the part that's missing in so much conversation about sense making. I'm finding lately, I'm glad you, I don't know what I was gonna say. I'm glad you brought this up. I'm probably just radically reinterpreting your story, and I apologize. But like,
no.
Your story has triggered this exact point, right? That it isn't just sense making is more than just noticing and sharing.
Right.
Right.
Yes.
And it's there is an implied. So what do we do with this? And I hate that because it instrumentalizes it. That's not my point. It's not always in the service, of this like.
But we're meaning making whether we want to or not.
Right.
Consciously or directly, yeah.
This is where I do find the least amount of if I think about like what's in the world for people who are doing work either inside an organization or as a consultant of some kind who want to fold in things from systems, complexity, futures, like the kind of design, like the stuff we're always on about, the stuff a lot of our listeners are probably into. I feel like this is one of those places where there's like almost a dearth of really good, like concrete stuff. Most of the methods we talk about, most of the things like from the Cynefin ecosystem, from like other forms of like facilitative and like dialogic practices, like anywhere else this stuff comes from, you get to a point and then it's the group that has to actually figure out what are we going to do about what we now understand. And it's always referred to as, an action, a decision, a choice, a probe, an experiment. But it's not that. It's a reconfiguration.
Right.
It's just of what? And I have a lot of empathy for people who encounter that point in the work and they're like, what the hell am I supposed to do here? Like there's not a good way to make it a concrete thing because it's at that point like 3 levels of meta. But the sense making has to be more than noticing and sharing. And I think that's where it's really tricky because it has to be so of and in and, context emergent. So,
well, we've talked about this a few times, I think, and it's worth highlighting here specifically where we're not necessarily in the room when the impacts that is going to happen happens. And it's because I don't know I don't know the end of that story. I don't know who was right. I don't know what it actually turned out to be. It doesn't really matter. That's not really the point. The number of times I've been in workshops or planning sessions or something where there's a decision made and we get to that objective and now we're going to walk out and know I don't remember what a lot of that was. And most people don't either. Even when we come regroup 2 weeks later, somebody starts the meeting saying, what did we decide again? Where are we going with this? It's because it doesn't matter. There's no meaning made. Again, there's no impact. But somebody will call back to a conversation that happened, an aha that happened, a reframing of something that they'd been looking for, that they'd been presented and then jumped on. And that's the sort of thing that they grip onto. And so it doesn't have a good dollar amount on it. There's not a good way to say if we come together, somebody, 20% of the audience will experience that sort of thing. But we know retrospectively that that's the when things actually shift and move. And so this is part of the struggle of like, how do we talk about the things we do and the value of it when the truth is, I try to talk a little bit more in terms of things like convening and space making and that sort of stuff, because ultimately it doesn't just come down to that. I don't want to reduce it. There's a lot that goes into the intentionality and the staging and of all of that. But ultimately it is just we're bringing people together so that they can have this reframing sort of experience, spark some sort of new meaning making that may happen in that room, or it may happen in retrospect a year later. Like I said, I heard that story 25 years ago. It kind of stuck with me because I thought it was interesting. Now it becomes extremely relevant and I talk about it all the time. And so those sort of things are what we're provoking. But man, it's so hard to like walk in and say, this is what you'll get when you allow me to provoke.
Yeah,
'Cause,
here.
25 years from now, we've seen something.
reframed.
Yeah.
What are you going to deliver us? Reconfiguration? You mean a reorg? No, fuck you, get out. Like, there's definitely, it is all a game of, well, the things we always talk about. But it's definitely been, and this is on my mind too, because as you know, I was just doing this with a client. But, you know, when you're in a room, whether it's one day or whether it's something longer like a program or a long project or an engagement, or you're immersed or you're internal, like whatever the size from a fractal point of view, you know, whatever the scale, whatever the level of granularity at which you're able to operate, it kind of doesn't matter, in that if everybody wants to engage in a way that is that opens up a little bit of possibility for something to be different, like that's kind of just that's the only really necessary thing to me, is that you just need a certain level of openness to engage or see something a little bit differently. And that openness is not like an innate personality trait. It's not like a mindset shift that needs to happen. It's what does like the system in which you are embedded enable? Does the system enable that openness? And I think in a lot of organizations, it's there more than people realize. The threshold is actually a lot lower for that than I think people realize. But the problem is that what then accompanies that, if you're going to actually engage or partner with, again, a client or whoever internal stakeholder, you know, then they start asking for the longer laundry list of like what we get out of this. And, you know, at the end of the day, action items, whatever you gotta say, actionable next steps, strategic tactics, like make up whatever language you want. But the thing is, lately, those actions, the portfolio of probes, whatever you want to call it, that might emerge from a certain part of this process, they are increasingly, in my mind, like they're almost never like, let's do this thing that we're going to literally put a team on tomorrow. They're more like the things that they have actually like known that they need to or want to try to do, but they've never had the right space to get it written down in a way that doesn't feel like it's either judging or calling someone else out, or that it's being treated like, this is remedial, why don't you do this? So, you know, it's like that you can't get there from here concept that we talked about. But more than anything, those list of actions are just the like explicit tip of the spear point of what is underneath, which is the reconfiguration thing. It's, if we try this little thing that we've written as a bullet point as a next step, it isn't just a potential probe that could teach us about the system. It's actually also something that, in taking the action, we are going to change the way something about our work is configured, or the way interactions are happening right now, so that we often talk about how it's not really the result of the action that matters as much as what the probe might teach us around what you then keep amplifying and dampening. But I think there's even like this third layer, which is just the act of acting changes something in the interactions for these teams. And that, I don't know if that's also just a function of our times, you know, the various challenges like SeaWorld that most of my clients are dealing with, like just that alone is really key for them. And I think some of that's also just because it's like 2026 and the world that we're in, that they need that kind of facilitation to even be able to do that.
You know, I think you're onto something. I've been, since hearing Dave Snowden talk about pagoda and proximity being that first component, proximity hit me really hard when that popped up, and how I hadn't really put my finger on how important that had been through this process. Just having people next to each other talking about the same thing. And even again, if I throw out all of what I know about sensemaking, just having two people in the room, I mean, I remember traveling with people, and I would regularly be going back and forth to Chicago or Toronto for a while. And I went through Atlanta all the time. Didn't matter how far north I was going. It's Richmond. I have to go through Atlanta if I'm going to fly Delta. Well, the number of times that I traveled with people, and it was their first or second time going through this massive airport. But for me, I was pretty seasoned. Just us being able to have the conversation about, why did you just do the thing that you did? Why would you go up that escalator? Oh, I didn't even think about why I went up that escalator. I do it all the time. Or why would you go up that escalator? You've never been here before. I don't know, because I don't know where I'm going. And like,
Yeah.
it seemed, I read that sign, I saw that thing, everyone else is walking up. I just thought that's where the flow of traffic, whatever it was. But the amount of understanding that just happens in those small interactions that notice the differences.
Yeah.
Is huge. And when I've gone into rooms with people and just had someone say, I don't know, we need to get this done within 12 hours because X happens at 12 hours. And someone else says, oh, well, I've always worked on a 24-hour clock because this is my understanding of when that happens. Everybody just kind of stops for a moment and stares at each other with their mouth hanging open a little bit. And then, like, I can see the sparks start to go, and then they start to rev up again. They've been isolated from each other with these assumptions about the same thing. They were both driving on the road together, but not in the same car. And they both saw the thing in the road, and each of them had a different response. But that different, one of them continued driving, the other hit the brakes. But then after that, it led to a whole other cacophony of events, who knows what. But because they weren't in the same car to have the conversation, they weren't able to align or connect or make sense of any of the other events that happened afterwards either. And so just that proximity is massive.
Totally.
If we're just saying, let's get people in the room together and have a dialogue, like, I don't know, like that alone. And this is why, like, one of my favorite icebreakers that I actually did, and it's hardly an icebreaker, I just had people, we were in Richmond, and I set up an event in D.C., or Northern Virginia, but, like, I knew that the instinct of these groups were going to be to carpool, because we don't fly from Richmond, you'd rent a car. We actually, in our corporate headquarters, we had a Hertz station, because people were driving up there so often, and there were buses, but, like, I knew that I was going to get 4 people from these teams in sets of 4 to drive up together. And before we got started, they would have to spend 2.5 hours driving up 95 and through traffic in the car together. And by the time they came in, they were already, like, prepped. There was no we're going to, like, cut through stuff. They were already, like, in this synchronicity that I couldn't have generated in any other way.
Yeah. Yeah, man. I mean, there's a lot of conversation, especially over the last several months I've seen out in the wild, but just in general in our work around, okay, if what we're doing is creating a container, are we still centering ourselves, our roles, or even if what you're doing is very facilitative and, you're invisible and they forget you were there, there's still, there's something to think about in the tension between curating a conversation or steering a conversation. Like, even that, right, is like that's not the goal. But then if what you're doing is literally just there's going to be a conversation, well, then what are you even involved for, right? But we know there's more to it than that. And that's what I find lately intriguing, is that so many people that we know, practitioners of all stripes, are really struggling to find the environments that are open to some other ways of thinking and working. And it feels like, again, this is only true right now, like summer 2026, I'm sure this could change in a heartbeat, but it's almost like the offsite, the group meeting, the thing that is already a container is like the place right now, because it's almost in some ways already protected, because it's already been established that it's going to happen, and then it's a little easier to, like, sneak something in, and then all it is exactly that. It's just people driving in the car together that is the whole thing. And I never in a million years would have thought that, like, the percentage of my work over the last year or so that has been in the form of that kind of facilitation, versus I still do longer projects and engagements and things that look like service design and stuff like that's happening, but it's the ratio of these is really interesting to me. And I think the big part of it is because so much of our work, at least in America right now, is everybody in their own car, metaphorically speaking, driving completely separately from each other, maybe trying to go to the same place, but like they don't even have the benefit of a CB radio sometimes. They are truly all just trying to follow like their own unique individual GPS to the same destination. And they not only don't get the benefit of working in proximity to each other in that apprenticeship way where we can apprentice to each other, they also don't get the benefit of the shared and then differing experiences that could obviously diffract through each other and enrich whatever it is they're trying to do.
Right.
Or to realize the thing they're all driving towards isn't even actually the thing that they want anymore. So
Right.
it's just a wild time to be alive, that one of the only places, these little points of refuge, these little islands of coherence that seem to exist for this kind of thing to like sneak in is in these like leadership programs or offsites or workshops, and even the ones that I've been doing recently, they haven't been, Jen, we need your help. Could we do this as a workshop? It's, we already have a workshop that is going to happen. Oh, really? What are you doing? What is the time for? They're like, we don't know yet. We just know we're getting together. And I'm like, wait, so you've already agreed and somebody dictated from above that all of you need to get together in a room? Yes. And what are the dictated objectives and goals? Just get together in a room. And we don't really know what to do with our time to make it useful, but we know we don't want to do ye old design workshop or ye old, Deloitte comes in and takes us through some stupid thing. And I'm like over here thinking, this is like the most backwards, like backing into or like climbing sideways in, but damn if it isn't right now.
Yeah.
Like, it's a portal. They're out there. Some of them are proving really effective in that the stuff doesn't, to your point, it doesn't die on the vine. Like it's
Right.
it spreads, and then there's more to go after that. So for any of my, fellow travelers out there, start doing workshops for leadership offsites.
Yeah. And you know what? You're making me think of two things, really. One is we need I've been thinking this for a long time. I think it's come up a few times, but we need a better way of telling the value of that story. And I think retrospective coherence is something that sort of helps us with that, to kind of not necessarily say, here's
Who's
what
we?
I can...
Who's we in this?
We facilitators that want to bring people together and do the convening and do the get people into the same car and provoke those conversations, because I think there's a reality and there's probably an overblown fear of everyone's going to come together, they're going to have their conversation, then they're going to look at me and say, what did I need you for? I'm not paying you. I'm paying you way too much to just coordinate a meeting for us. So what are you here for again? I think our storytelling ability needs to be sort of pointed towards this is the trajectory that we saw things on, or this is where we intersected. And now that we've been there, these are the smudge marks we've left.
Oh, yeah.
And that's the value of it. And I think that's the fact that there's not like a dashboard for that, there's not a metric for that, there's not an expectation to set necessarily. People are afraid to go that realm. I think we just need to talk about that a little bit more openly, that's accessible.
I think what is important in doing that makes it successful, or at least what I have found effective, is that it's got to be very, very, very specific to the use case and the context.
Right.
So every time we have, for example, Topology has like some like broad materials that talk about facilitation or this at like a higher level, just as a sort of here's how we think about it, and but it's rare that someone cares to hear like my philosophical approach to this and what we do as an organization, like what my firm actually offers. But more often, what is of interest is something like, I don't want to say a case study because I don't do a lot of those, but like a project snapshot is the language I like to use, which is literally, here is the context that existed. Here is why I was invited or we were asked to, or how this like partnership came to be. So why they tapped Topology. And then what the fuck did we do? And what changed because of it? This is very standard. Like no one's reacting to this like, what, holy shit. Very, very standard. And so you can tell that standard story and just throughout make it really clear that the means by which we achieved that outcome, whatever it is, or what we learned, was through this form of work. So it's like you got to hide the spinach in the brownies, Like you can't actually make spinach more appealing because right now, and probably for a lot of at least, North American clients, it's going to be spinach, and it's going to be not palatable, because most things, hear the word facilitative or dialogic work of any kind, and it's spinach. It's ew. Versus, actually this metaphor doesn't work because spinach is so nutritionally dense. It should be the other way around. But regardless, I don't think anytime soon that the kind of clients, at least that are in my web and my world, where I have the actual influence and power to do anything meaningful, none of them want spinach. But yet, when they get the spinach snuck into their brownies, boy, do good things happen. So I'm going to say, here is the brownie mix that I used, and here is the great thing that happened with the brownies that we made. And by the way, I snuck some spinach in, and so not only did you get the brownies you wanted, they were better for you than any other brownie you've ever had. Like, it's a win-win all around. Call us next time you want brownies that have spinach snuck in, but you'll never know the spinach is in there. Dude, this is it. This is how it goes. You know what I'm talking about, right? Like this era where everyone was like,
here's a better one for you.
Hiding their veggies in their brownies for their kids.
Cauliflower in the chicken nuggets for kids. That's a real thing.
See, I don't know that.
It's actually pretty good.
That's your version of mine. I'll take it. It's a
pretty good one. Yeah, it sounds better than
like
spinach
cauliflower
brownies.
rice or whatever. I mean, I don't want to go down this weird food triggering role, because just eat real food, guys. But yeah, this metaphor I wish I had stopped to think through, because it doesn't hold up, because spinach is so good for you. But like, if you think about an organization that's, we don't want anything to do with X. Like, I don't like broccoli. I don't eat it. I'm not going to pay for facilitation. I'm not going to pay for broccoli. Get the fuck out of here. What I would really like is some pre-made blah, 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 and like deliver it to me. Or promise me exactly what kind of nutritional impact this thing's going to have. And, to your point about storytelling, this isn't to say, no, I don't think we need better storytelling. But the reason I asked we was because I think as a field or as a collection of practitioners, it's like a fool's errand. I think as individuals, telling the story of how you, or as a company or whatever you want to think about it, the way that you tell the story of the value that you are able to help co-create is always through an actual story of an actual thing. Never the philosophical abstract stuff that I'm usually much more likely to talk about.
Right.
So make yourself some project snapshots and sneak in, we used these methods, or this is how we convened, and then this is what happened. Anyway, we're probably getting close to time. I got to go soon, but go ahead.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
The other thing that I was coming up for me, I had heard recently there was a study that was done where they took a group number one was put together socially, but they weren't given food for a period of time, not a dangerous amount of time, but enough that they were feeling hungry. And they had them wired up there reading their brain signals, however they do that, through group one. Group two was isolated, but they were given food. And what they were finding was the people in isolation that were wanting for human connection and the people that were together that were feeling hunger, the same part of the brain was activating. And the more they dug into that, the more they realized that the same sort of body sensations that are trigger, like go eat something, you need more water, go listen to your body kind of stuff. The I need to get out and see people, the I'm feeling lonely impulse, those sort of things are physiologically inseparable from any other sort of I'm craving or I'm lacking sort of impulse that happens.
Yeah.
And so I think what you're seeing with the need these days to just come together is that
absolutely
that hunger cry that is actually happening.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Not only that too, in a way that part of me often has to pause every time one of these opportunities comes up, because I also don't want to be in the role of exploiting that hunger. You're starving.
Right.
You'll take anything. Okay.
Right.
You take my hamburger. That's a really important place for someone to stop and pause and ask themselves what their role is in that engagement or that partnership, right? Or that relationship with that group. But yeah, I mean, there's there's such an interesting, we might have talked about this before, maybe even on the last conversation about burnout, which ironically these two actually do go together nicely now. So they'll both end up on YouTube in this order. But um, in the world of like food, like in like eating disorder science and research, one of the things, this ties to the study you just mentioned, but when someone's in the throes of anorexia, for example, the starvation results in what they call emotional blunting. It basically means that you don't feel the various emotional and psychological states that are probably unpleasant. There are a lot of working theories around.
Wow.
Because like I feel like we might have talked about this recently, so I apologize if I'm repeating, but or it might have been in a
No, I
different
haven't
chat.
heard this
But
before.
basically, you know, the age-old kind of thoughts around like eating disorders being something that get triggered when a girl is of an age where everyone tells her she should be thin and be like, that can be a trigger. But there's something a lot deeper and more complex that's happening, and you know, modern research on any number of things related to disordered eating and disordered relationships with food, there is a wealth of interesting stuff out there. I haven't kept up on it. There was a period where I was doing work related to this, so it was a topic I got into, but it was really fascinating to learn that there is a lot of really good like research that shows that it is not so simple as I want to be skinny, therefore I starve myself. In fact,
Right.
that's almost
Yes.
never ever the case, right? It's much
Right.
more about I am either starving myself or I am binging and purging, whichever form you have, or orthorexia, which is just that I build a bunch of food rules. Whatever I'm doing, it's a form of exerting control over my body, which might be the only thing I feel like I have control over because the world is overwhelming or whatever it might be. And there's a strong correlation between anorexia and anxiety, and then binge eating disorders and depression. They're all on this spectrum together, right? So regardless of all of that, when someone has been starved or has starved themselves and their caloric intake is so low, it's obviously sort of, you know, doing a lot of things to decision making, and it creates a negative feedback loop where you start to make even more poor decisions in your starved state. But the emotional blunting becomes addictive. And when someone is working their way out of that state of starvation, which I'm just thinking metaphorically hunger, like in your example, as
Yeah.
someone comes out of that state through refeeding, and the emotional blunting starts to wear off, and the person has to actually engage with the emotional and psychological, you know, sensations that they haven't had in a while, that is the most precarious time because it is overwhelming, and it is part of what they were starving themselves to avoid, even if they aren't conscious of any of this, right, at like a conscious choice level. And so you are moving your way through an addiction, but it's not an addiction to food or even an addiction to starvation. It's an addiction to an emotionally blunted state. And I, in what is probably the most problematic metaphor I've used so far, think a lot of the working world in 2026 America is like we have imposed on ourselves as organizations a state of starvation, in the sense you're talking about, the emotional stuff or what have you, but more the human to human interaction. We've been put into roles where we're really expected to do things in those separate cars. And so what results now, compounded by the fact that there is so much remote work, which has all of its benefits, but nonetheless, if you're not in a physical space with a human for a while, everybody's got
Yeah.
like the equivalent of like workplace anorexia and emotional blunting, and trying to like claw your way out of that through some of the work we do is like really fraught. So you've got to move with a level of care and deliberation for what you're doing. There's an ethical component. Weird
This-
metaphor alert. Sorry.
No, this is so relevant. So I think you might have been in this session. Tom Kerwin and John Cutler, I think, did that state of tech sensemaker.
Yeah.
I think maybe 3 years ago or so.
Yeah.
And we had a couple of sensemaking of sessions.
Yeah,
around
I remember
those
doing one of them. I
results.
joined one of them.
Yeah, I remember there was the thing that stood out to me the most in that was there was a guy in there that had been doing organizational work for like 40, 50 years or so. And he's reading through all of that, and he says, this is the first time that I've seen people talk about a new technology with rapid adoption without any sort of excitement or optimism or just engagement at all. Either anything, it was either anxiety or ambivalent or something along those lines, but it was like when the internet happened, when PCs happened, all of those sort of things, there was like a imagine the possibilities sort of component to it. But what we were reading, and as soon as he said it, it was like, duh, exactly. What we were reading was so antithetical to that idea of like, it was, well, I'm doing more bullshit again. Well, it just means that I don't know what we're doing next. There's just more confusion. There's just more malaise. Yeah. There's just more, and like the tone was so exhausted and just over it before we'd even really integrated into it. And just calling that out, I think you're spot on. What you're reading is that emotional blunting, which I'd never heard of before, but that's what I heard and what he was saying was he was reading. Yeah.
So we've just got a nation of workers who have been essentially starved of meaning and meaningful collaboration and purposeful human interaction. And so you get a workplace full of emotional blunting as both a coping mechanism and a feedback loop that is a result of that starvation. God, this is such a problematic metaphor. Anyway, let's wrap for today so we can get off of this topic. And we'll talk again next time. We have some more
we'll
guests
kick off
coming up. So let's end for today.
Wonderful.